Welcome to Fields of Study from the Masonic Cancer Center. Today we sit down with Rana Leed from the Minnesota Cancer Clinical Trials Network. Hello and welcome to our next edition of Fields of Study from the Masonic Cancer Center. My name is Max Huber. I am the Communications and Marketing Manager for the Masonic Cancer Center at the University of Minnesota. In this web series, we're highlighting different researchers and staff members from the Masonic Cancer Center. And today we have a special member from one of our subsidiaries, affiliate organizations. There's a number of ways you could look at it, but it's from the Minnesota Cancer Clinical Trials Network, or MNCCTN. I am joined by regulatory specialist Rana Leed. Rana, welcome, and thanks for joining me.
Oh, happy to be here. It's a good break in the monotony of working from home.
Yeah, we are all, normally we work in conjoining buildings. We get to run over to your building. You guys come over to our building. We get to meet. Now we're all kind of stuck at home. How are you adjusting to having an office that is also maybe your living room?
Actually pretty well. Before actually coming to the University of Minnesota, I had worked from home for about a year. So I had all of these sort of accoutrements to working from home. The headset, which is like an awesome bonus.
Yes.
A desk, extra monitors. We've got an office space. So doing the switch was not actually that difficult for me.
Awesome. And in terms of how, you talked about a previous job and now you're obviously with the Minnesota Cancer Clinical Trials Network. We're going to call it MNCCTN moving forward from here. Tell us kind of how you got to where you are today. What's your background?
So I've actually been in clinical research for about 15 years or so. I have a master's in public health and health management and policy. And I had actually just literally fallen into clinical research. I was looking for a job. Someone recommended to me, oh, hey, this research assistant might work. And I fell in love. It's a great career. It really helps those people who maybe want to work in healthcare or medicine, but maybe don't want patient contact. Yeah. Those of us who love paperwork, who love forms, who love binders, that's really how I fell in love with it.
Awesome. And you are, like I said, the regulatory specialist. What does that mean? What does a regulatory specialist do?
Well, we do a lot, and I could probably give you like a 4-hour presentation on it. But essentially, it's the person who really manages the regulatory side of clinical research. That predominantly means, for most people, IRB submissions. But it can also mean collecting all of what are known as essential documents, things like training logs, delegation logs, all of the extra paperwork that goes along with a clinical trial that's not patient-specific.
Understood. And you're not originally from Minnesota. You were a transplant here. Tell us a little bit about your background and where you're originally from.
I'm originally from Pennsylvania, from a smaller town outside of Philadelphia called Lancaster. I had lived there for first 20 so years of my life and decided that I wanted to see the rest of the United States, and then spent some time in Oregon, actually, and then came here to Minnesota. So I'm working my way back east, I like to say.
Got it. You kind of had the East Coast, you went West Coast, now you're kind of in the middle.
Yep.
I don't know how the winters are there, but you've survived a couple winters here in Minnesota, right?
Yeah, they seem fine. And actually it was kind of funny because the big difference between Minnesota and Pennsylvania, where I grew up, isn't the amount of snow, it's how often it falls. So the quantity is about the same, but in Pennsylvania, you'd get 3 or 4 big blizzards, and that would be it. It melts in between those. And it's never terribly cold for too long.
Got it. Well, we do get cold here in Minnesota. And one of the things with just transitioning here in Minnesota, the MNCCTN, this started in 2017. We got funding from the state legislature to start a clinical trials network to bring clinical trials to greater Minnesota. Usually with clinical trials before that, you'd have to come to the Twin Cities for the University of Minnesota or go down to Rochester for Mayo. And this was an opportunity to bring the equity up for everyone, make it a little more reasonable for someone to kind of, if they had to go somewhere, you don't have to maybe travel as far. So tell us, to get a little more in depth, what is MNCCTN?
Well, so like you said, it is legislatively funded, which is actually an amazing effort. And I always try to highlight that because it's not the standard funding for networks or studies. And I think that's been one of the most amazing things about this is that it actually is guaranteed legislative funded. We have 5 healthcare organization partners, so we cover quite a bit of the state. And the idea is to make sure that the clinical trials, cancer clinical trials, are available to everybody within 30 miles. There are parts of the state that we are just not ever going to be able to cover because no one lives there but cows. But we actually have covered quite a good portion of the state with our partners. And then we do take studies out of the University of Minnesota and out of Mayo, and we run them through these healthcare organizations where they really do the heavy lifting. Like I said, my job is to collect regulatory documents, and our partner organizations, their job is to do all of the actual work. So I do want to highlight that too. We're just facilitating the stuff that they do with their patients.
And you can't really just like drop off materials and say, here, now you're running cancer clinical trials. So there has to be kind of a training process throughout this. And really MNCCTN has started small just to get the groundwork going for these organizations and hoping for the future to have some really impressive, great trials running through these networks.
Yeah, and that's always really one of the big things in clinical research in general is the training. There's study-specific training, which is, on visit 1, you do this. But there are quite a bit of other pieces of training that go on clinical research. Training on human subjects, the rights of them, training on how to do an informed consent, and even something as sort of mundane as how to fill out a paper document or how to create a checklist. And that's really what we're looking forward to really starting with our partners is trying to figure out those pieces that are missing from our staff at the partner organizations. A lot of these coordinators that we have are extremely busy because they also have clinical patients that they see. So any sort of training that we can provide to take off that difficult work, that's what we're really aiming for.
Right. And I mean, you're already working kind of remote from all of these different organizations that you're going with. So transitioning from working in an office at the University of Minnesota to working at the office at your home really doesn't seem like that big of an issue.
Yeah, our partner organizations are spread throughout the state, so almost all of our meetings were through webinars and other online conferencing systems already. So that has not been actually that difficult to do. We hopefully are still going to have our annual meeting in October, which is our big one face-to-face meeting every year. But there hasn't been too much of a difficult transition for us in terms of the remote work.
Got it. In terms of just the work that you're doing, what's been the most interesting thing that's come up for you in your time here with MNCCTN?
The work with the MNCCTN has been really fascinating. I have, in previous careers, worked on well-established multi-site networks through various NIH groups. This is the first time for me personally that I've worked on a network that's in the building phase. And that's been extremely rewarding for me to be able to bring my experience with networks to helping to grow and sort of formalize some of the processes, but also to see other ways of doing it. I think one of the things we also really, in MNCCTN, really like to highlight is the collaborative approach. It's one thing for us to come in and say, this is how you do it, end of story. But our different healthcare organizations all have different processes, none of which are perfect. We're not perfect here, but together we do create a sort of cohesive process. And that's been really rewarding, is figuring out what works the best for everybody.
Yeah, I'll say personally, I started about the same time that Marie, the director of MNCCTN, started, and just seeing it go from an idea and a concept to actually growing, and now there's a staff, and you've got these relationships throughout the state. And you mentioned the annual meeting, seeing all these people come from these partner organizations come in. It's been impressive to see this grow from nothing to where it is today. And it makes me hope for what is to come.
Yeah, I mean, I must say that this network is extremely innovative. And I don't know whose idea it was, but they deserve a huge honor. We've had a couple of other states that have, or other cancer centers across the nation have said, what on earth are you guys doing and how did you get it funded? This is amazing. Because the divide between sort of the white tower aspect of academic institutions and not even just rural areas, but suburban and urban that aren't connected to academic institutions, that divide is a known issue. And I think that this network and the Masonic Cancer Center really deserve quite a bit of credit for stepping out and figuring out how to transfer that divide.
Got it. And you mentioned some very uplifting things. I said the word hope, and I always like to end the interviews with this. What gives you hope? And it could be with MNCCTN, it could be just in general, but right now with the world that we live in, with the way things are going, but there's some positives that we're seeing in the work that MNCCTN is doing. What gives you hope?
You know what, right now, I'm generally a pretty optimistic person. And I actually think that there's a lot of really good takeaways that we can pull from what's happening right now and that have been put into place that actually in clinical research might transfer over. The idea of working remotely, it's not that scary. Turns out we all do our jobs. And also just the idea of sort of, we don't need as many meetings. We really don't. But we also, there's a lot of our stuff that we can do electronically that, the regulations and institutional practices across the board at different colleges and places have not allowed, but turns out we can do these things with just a little bit of work. And one of the other things that I've really found really amazing is everybody has said, what do you need? I'll do it. Mm-hmm. Whether that's been being redeployed to help with COVID-19 studies or, coming in and working in Boynton and managing some triage stuff. That's been really amazing.
Yeah, it's the adaptability of people with this
Mm-hmm.
is cool. And like you mentioned, a lot of the stuff is new for so many people because it's been done the same way for years and years. And now we have to adapt. We have to change.
Yep. And turns out we can.
We can, and that's absolutely amazing. So, Rana, I want to thank you for joining us. Any last second thoughts before we end today's session?
No, just everybody just to, make sure you get outside and breathe a little fresh air from being stuck in our makeshift offices.
That's true. And wash your hands. Always wash your hands.
Yep.
You need to wash your hands. That's one of the things I'm impressed about. Like all of a sudden it's like, weren't we all supposed to wash our hands? But now we're like, we gotta wash our hands and use lotion. My hands get so dry. It's just like,
yeah.
Anyway, well, thank you again. We are excited. You can find out more about MNCCTN by going to cancer.umn.edu. You can also find the organization on Facebook and Twitter. So, Rana, thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us. Again, this is Fields of Study from the Masonic Cancer Center. We'll see you next time.
Great. Thanks.